Hello, everybody. Hello, my lovely twinny Peter. I've been thinking about you actually, and I've been wondering about how you're finding independent life. So now you're not employed by anybody, you don't have people around you doing stuff for you and things like that. Has anything surprised you? Has anything you've had to do that you thought, oh, this is new?
Yeah, quite a lot. I mean, the first thing is that when you're no longer the CEO of an organization, never mind what it says about hours of working and all the rest of it, it is a full-on 24/7 responsibility that never goes away. And at the moment, I'm not at the apex of responsibility for anything. So I'm helping people think about things. The first big change for me is the amount of headspace I've got. Now I'm no longer a chief executive responsible for anything and everything 24/7. I'm consulting and advising and supporting other people to think about things. And even yesterday, when I had 3 big meetings, they were meetings being chaired by other people. And that is so much more straightforward than my life used to be, always being like on display and having to come to the conclusions myself and everything. So that's really interesting and feels different. And a couple of people said, "Oh, you seem quite busy," and I don't feel busy at all. I feel like I've got lots more space than I had, which I'm sure will change. Another very interesting development is that I've had to raise my first invoice to charge people for something, and I've never done that before. I'm good at paying invoices, but to actually send a bill to someone for my time is intellectually and a development. I didn't even know how to do it. I had to ask someone for a template. So that's a bit of a change.
Now you're having to value yourself, aren't you? You're having to say, I am a person who is worth this amount an hour or this amount of day of a day of,
Yes,
this amount. How does that feel?
a bit weird, and the value is different to different people, and one feels, I think, that one wants to sell oneself or give oneself away on a kind of sliding scale relative to the capacity of the organization you're supporting to pay and the passion and interest that you have yourself in the issue. So when it comes to Somerset cricket, I can't help thinking and caring about Somerset Cricket Club all the time anyway. So I'm not going to charge them for anything, but we'll chip in here, there, and everywhere. Whereas a multi-million-pound business that is engaging me for my skills, but also for my reputation, that's quite a uh, I've got something to I've got something to value there, but also something to lose. Because if they screw up or I sort of screw up, then my that impacts on my value in all sorts of other places as well. So I'm sort of um, trying to come to terms with it, but it's quite a different way of thinking. I mean, I've been very
Yeah.
fortunate in my career. I've been pretty well paid for quite a long time. Some people would say very well paid, but I've never really agitated for that. It's just sort of happened, and I've tried to do things which I've really enjoyed doing. And to go back to my opening remarks, I suppose, they have been all consuming um, to this point, and this is a different way of trying to price different aspects of your life for different organizations. I suppose I'm really interested in how other people do it. To be honest, it feels a very different way of organizing one's time.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it makes me think about the remarks that David Holdsworth made about selflessness, the selfless nature of those of us who serve in the sector, both those who volunteer and those who pay. And it got me thinking about something. I mean, I've had, arguments about it. So my team at
Mm.
DSC are always trying to, so I do a lot of public speaking, as you know, Peter. I go to conferences within the sector. And my team are always saying, you ought to charge, you ought to charge. And I'm like, how much should I charge? 40 years worth of experience, written 10, 11 books, at least five, six, seven probably of which have been about the voluntary sector and for the voluntary sector, been around a long time, like you, have a degree of reputation. So should I charge £250? Is that value to me? Or is it more value if I just do it as part of my job at DSC and we don't charge, which I don't? And in fact, what we actually do is we say to people, all we want is we want you to encourage those you serve to use DSC services or to buy them some books or to pay for a place on a course or something. So actually the benefit is going out to the people in the sector. If I was to value myself, I don't know, Peter, I think I'm worth at least £10,000 per half an hour. It's like, how on earth do you make those judgments? So this is what's super interesting about it. But it brings me back to that is said a bit tongue in cheek. Clearly it's way more than that. It's probably half a million, half an hour.
Well, when you think what Liz Truss gets for her speeches to these global right-wing, you're a bargain at that price.
Exactly. So but I was thinking about this business about selflessness, and it's kind of looked down on. So Dan Pallotta, the guy in America who talks about how we so and I think he's absolutely right. It is nuts that we get really angry about paying, big wages or big salaries to those who are doing good for society, that we don't pay that. We think that's wrong, rather than, the amounts we pay to people who run, I don't know, pornographic websites or magazines or gaming or gambling or what have you. But on the other hand, there's also part of me that says we're valuing all the wrong stuff. So I don't think people should be exploited by any way, shape, or that we should say, oh, we can get you cheap, if you work in the voluntary sector. And actually, it's my experience that isn't what happens anyway. The vast majority of charities pay what they can afford. They pay what's within the budget and what feels fair and reasonable at the time. They're not devaluing the experience or the skills that the individual brings, but they're just paying, look, we're a £250,000 a year charity. You can't have half of that in your wage packet. We're going to have to whatever. And also the fact that we have this horrible habit in society of equating performance and effectiveness with pay. We say things like, if you want peanuts, if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. We say things like, if you want to get the best people, you've got to advertise, big salaries. And Peter, you had a decent salary at the NSPCC. It was what you were worth for the size and scale of the organisation, for the reach, for the impact. But it's also kind of right that that's the level at which you were paid. It wasn't excessive. Other people might disagree, but I don't feel you were paid excessively by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, probably you could have been paid more. But it's this point about selflessness. It's like we look down on it. We sort of say, because it's selflessness also that drives our sector. It's the volunteers who turn up and want to genuinely help other people. It's the trustees who give up their own time to perform a legal role, which they could get into trouble for doing. But they do it because they're selfless. Well, some of them do it for, their name or something, but they do it because they're caring it's the right thing to do. And I think we've got to start rethinking this whole notion that. And I remember, for example, when I sat on the SORT committee years ago, we had a lot of, and we were changing the SORT, we had a lot of submissions from big charities saying, can we please change the SORT so we don't have to disclose as much information and we can be less transparent in our accounts, because many of us are competing with private sector companies. And the openness of our financial information is giving them a competitive advantage because we don't have access to the same level of financial detail in their accounts and in the stuff they produce, which was true. But I'm very happy to say that the committee said, well, it's not our job to lower the standards. It's our job to keep the standards and encourage the other. And I think some of the procurements changed. I think they have to be a bit more open, don't they? Private sector companies with their accounts and levels of profit and stuff like that. And I feel a bit the same about this issue. I think that we need to be encouraging people to stop valuing everything in terms of money that they earn, or that, wealthier people are better people, they're cleverer people, they're worth more than people who are doing profoundly good work for, not huge salaries. So, I think selflessness is the best things about our sector, and that's what I want. I don't want someone who's come to work for me because it's a big salary. I want someone to come to work for me because they actually genuinely care about the cause and they're happy with the salary that we're offering. In my experience, the best people are not the best paid. The best paid people are the ones who wanted to be best paid, if that makes any sense. Anyway, there you go. I don't know what you think about any of that.
I agree with it, a lot of it, but then I'm in a comfortable enough position to agree with it. I suppose I'm feeling now what a lovely situation I have to be able to apply differential pricing to myself, in relation to organizations' ability to pay and my desire to help them. So I'm making some speeches in the coming weeks, and I haven't thought about charging for them because I feel like
The right thing to do.
I'm interested in the organisations, and I want to help them, and I will learn something as a result of engaging with them and all the rest of it, and that is fine. But I'm not 28 years old, based in London, still
Trying to
living
buy a
at
house.
home on a ridiculous commute. There's a certain level. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to live on salaries,
Oh,
and
definitely. Oh,
and
yes,
and
this is
develop,
it.
isn't
I
it?
agree.
So how do we get the what charities can afford to pay? And yes, there are still, I think, plenty of young people with big hearts and passion and interest in the causes that want to work for organisations like the ones which we have been involved in, which is great. But I wonder how um, uh, sustainable it is, because it's getting more difficult for
Oh,
more
yeah, listen,
people.
I am not by any way, shape, or form promoting low wages, Peter, at all.
Mm,
And I think it's an important distinction to make. I think young people, everybody should be paid enough to live, to buy a home, to have a holiday, to run a car. I think absolutely everybody should have enough money to do that. That's a separate
yeah,
conversation, though, to this. I mean, greed is a strong word, and I'm not sure I would always describe it as greed necessarily, but this kind of desire to have more, 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 more. I think that's the point I'm making. It's I want people to live good, decent lives. I don't admire, and I don't think it's right that people go home to a bed. They run a charity that does profound work. They're the chief executive, and they live in a bed sit, in South London somewhere.
yeah,
That's not okay. So I absolutely don't approve of that. But I do think that there comes a point where it's like people are just chasing more and more and more money. It's I think that's my general point. I'm not advocating for low pay in our sector at all.
yeah,
I am saying
yeah,
often the pay is low because literally that's all the charity can afford. And often, if you're reliant, for example, particularly on local authority contracts, which we touched on, I think last week, wasn't it, where they don't pay enough anyway to do the work that you need to do. So yeah, I'm definitely not saying that, but I am talking about this kind of how we value money, and we think that rich people are
yeah,
somehow other better than poor people, or that we feel if we're not paid really big wages that there's something wrong with us. Whereas being able to say to somebody, you've got a livable wage and you do amazing work, and that's what we value. And we have people like that in the
yeah,
sector. I mean, an awful lot of the folk in our sector are so well qualified and so experienced and so skilled, particularly in smaller to medium-sized charities where you have to do everything yourself
yeah,
at senior level. You don't have a whole load of staff to do it with you. And how that those people could definitely 100% earn really big wages if they went to work for private sector companies with the skills that they bring.
yeah,
And we see it happen sometimes. But the reality is that they're doing what they do for the lower wage than they could earn because of selflessness and because of the care for the cause. And
yeah.
I think that's a plus. I think that's a value, and I want people like that. Now, having
Which
said that,
give
I was joking with my mother the other day. She was moaning about train drivers' pay. And I was saying to her, what do they do? And I was like, listen, Mum, I have one basic rule about people being really well paid. I want anybody who is in charge of anything that could take my life to have enough money to be able to afford a gardener, a nanny, to never to be able to be chauffeured to work, to never, ever, ever have to worry about money, to be able to afford really wonderful holidays without scrimping saving. So if you're a surgeon, a nurse, a train driver, a pilot, any of those people who could kill me I'm tired, a bit pissed off, or worrying about paying the gas bill. I don't want that. I want those people to be super well paid. The rest of us can just crack on with life. And I must admit, she did laugh. And I'm like, but it's true, you say what to train drivers, they kill us if they get it wrong. It's
Yeah.
like, and of course, they're just on a track, and we know that's not true. You know it takes skill to be a train driver. So I pay them more. So I say, because my life is in their hands.
The person I'd like to pay more at the moment is the person who came round last weekend and went above and beyond to optimize the speed of our Wi-Fi, which I hadn't realised had been getting progressively worse. And there was a way of doing that job which would help us out a bit. But he was just one of these people who took real pride in problem solving, and it wasn't enough just to kind of botch the thing together, but to fundamentally work out exactly what needed to be done and put it all right. And I thought, well, that's a life-saving service, because the idea of having no Wi-Fi with Junior around and about is just doesn't bear thinking about. So yeah, it's interesting what we what we value in our lives.
Well, we can't function without it. I mean, I'm one of those people who think that broadband should be a public utility and should be treated in the same way, because it's no longer a nice to have. It's not a luxury. You cannot function anymore in most. I mean, I just think about my health service. Now they want me to do everything via my NHS app. And whilst you can still turn up in person or you can ring, it's not as easy to do. And listen, I don't object to that. I think that's fine if it's more efficient, all the rest of it. But you have to have internet access and to be and enough data to be able to do that. So if I was in a different field of work, maybe when I retire, Peter, I'll start campaigning for broadband and internet access to. Well, the internet is free, isn't it? But for your broadband to be, a public utility in the way that energy and that sort of thing is, and regulated in a similar sort of way.
Yeah. Our friend Wes Streeting and the NHS and IT. There's quite a way to go. I need to get some injections for vaccinations for some overseas travel, which I'm going to be doing rather excitingly in the next few weeks. But I'll never be able to get through to the doctor if I ring. So I'm going to go for a walk later and just turn up and ask them, what do I need to do? It's the old-fashioned way, I think, certainly around here at the moment, that works the best for all the apps and everything. But hey-ho. What about the selflessness of trustees? And we've there's this great long debate, probably not for today, about whether charity trustees should be paid or not. But
no debate.
There's an but let's say no. But then we are extraordinarily grateful for and dependent on those people who are selfless enough to be charity trustees. I saw something which you put on online a few weeks ago about encouraging good habits in trustees, and you've written about this as well, haven't you? What? Give us your kind of headline words of wisdom on how to be a good trustee from a CEO's perspective.
Yeah, well, because I've worked in the charitable sector now for nearly 40 years, and I've seen governance change dramatically in that time. 40, 30 years ago, even 15 years ago, trustees turned up at a board meeting once a quarter. They might attend a subcommittee. That was kind of it. That was sort of okay. Whereas I think that, I know now that the expectations of trustees has just profoundly changed. And now it's about engagement. It's about demonstrating that you're actively involved in the charity, like you are paying attention in your governance duty. And in fact, the commission has also changed in how, when it goes and investigates, it's not just interested anymore in what did the board minutes say, and were you in line with your powers. It wants to know, well, how did you communicate with each other? What was the email thread? Where were trustees able to voice their views, etc., etc. So it's more sophisticated now. And I would say, it's wonderful having trustees, but the worst trustees are not the ones who are difficult and disruptive. They're a pain in the arse, but at least they're there and they might say something that's useful. It's what I call ghost trustees, those trustees who are officially on the the paper. They're listed as a trustee, but they don't turn up to many meetings. They don't engage outside of meetings. They don't respond to emails, anything like that. And quite apart from it being super dangerous, because they are equally accountable. So if decisions are made and they don't know anything about it, saying I didn't know anything about it, I was too busy, I didn't have time to respond, doesn't cut the mustard. You're held accountable whether you turned up at the meeting or you read the papers or not. So we have a duty to protect our trustees as chief executives by making sure they've got the information they need to demonstrate they're governing well. But it's so, if you join a charity to be a trustee, they chose you because they felt you had something to offer and to contribute. And presumably you applied because you felt you had something to offer and contribute. So I'm always amazed by, when you get there, why aren't you contributing? Why aren't you engaging? Why aren't you responding? So I always say to trustees, respond to emails. It's a thumbs up. Demonstrate to people that you've read the papers, or even if you're telling a fib, you're pretending you've read it, but you've indicated. Otherwise, because about you, Peter, but when trustees don't respond to my emails, and I have to say my lot are pretty good, when they don't respond, I think one of two things. I think either they haven't bothered to read it, or I think they're thinking bad thoughts and don't know how to say it. It's not a positive thing when they don't respond. So that's the first thing. The second thing I always say, which always causes massive arguments, is you must CC all when you're engaged in a conversation via email about whatever the issue is. Because I've seen boards and sat on boards where trustees may or may not communicate with the chief exec and the chair, but none of the other trustees know any of that's happening. So they don't. So you can sit on the board. I have absolutely no idea what my colleague Malcolm thinks about an issue, and then subsequently it turns out that Malcolm's been frantically emailing the chief executive for the last 2 weeks, activating about this issue. So because you can't possibly, in law we have collective responsibility, but how can you have collective responsibility if you don't know what your colleagues are thinking, and if you're only hearing from them in a board meeting? And also, we've all been to board meetings, Peter, where the same people speak all the time and other people don't say very much at all, so you still don't know what they're thinking. So the thing is get over yourself. So I get that, but don't clog up my inbox. Oh, grow up. You're an adult. Manage your bloody inbox. You make the decisions about what you respond to, but don't make other people make decisions for you about what you can know about. You need to know this stuff. And, you're abrogating to say, like, well, you didn't copy me in, so I didn't know. But we didn't copy you in because you said you didn't want your email box plugged. So I take no notice of that. I CC regardless of whether they like it or not. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, and again, it all relates to engagement, is about contributing. So not just nodding through papers at board meetings, not just, but actually taking the time to read them and think about the papers before you turn up at the meeting and then ask helpful questions. Again, trustees sat silently through meetings, allowing other trustees to take over and to do all the speaking isn't really responsible governance. Even if all you're going to say is, I happen to agree with Comrade Wanless, or I happen to agree with what José said, or, I don't have a view. Whatever it is, you need to speak up and contribute, because otherwise, again, how do we know that you're not sat there quietly seething with fury, or you've had a brilliant idea, but you're not brave enough to say it? So those are the three things I would say. I don't know what you think.
Really good. Yeah. As a chief executive, I can relate to a lot of that, and I found it really helpful when trustees, if they had questions of clarification, however dumb or stupid. Sometimes I think trustees are quiet because they think this is a silly question, or they're quiet because they think it's a small point, or even worse, they make a small point in the meeting and the whole meeting is derailed, not on the issues you're trying to discuss. So creating an environment in which all sorts of questions of clarification can be kind of hoovered up between the moment the paper issues and the conversation at the board. That helps the conversation at the board be so much better. So I'd probably add that one in from the chief executive's perspective, and maybe we should come back at another time to how we behave as trustees ourselves, and I'll do a little bit of an audit of how I'm measuring up to your 3 points, which
I mean, none of us are perfect. I have this rule of 3, which is, well, a third, and a third. And I always say to chief execs, a third of your trustees will read the paperwork thoroughly. Some of them will mark in red pen, where the comma was wrong, or, any sort of typos. A third of them will skim the paperwork on the way to the meeting, and a third of them will wing it in the meeting. But it's not the same people every time. I've got all three of those trustees. There have been times when I've been super well prepared and I've managed all the, I've got my head around all the information. There have been times when I've been like frantically trying to catch up whilst I'm on the way to the meeting. And there have been times when I've been in the meeting thinking, I hope everybody else has read this because I've got no clue. So it isn't a judgment on particular individuals or characters, but it is, I always say to chief executives, it's the reality. So you have to manage the way in which you present information, the way in which communicating, understanding that you've got one lot who've really well informed, one lot who are a little bit informed, and one lot who really don't have a clue what's going on. But in order to have the proper level of conversation, you need to do everything with the people who don't have a clue what's going on. See what I mean? And then you will get to a better sort of space. And I've also always said it's really dangerous because if you prioritize the people who've read it, that's a third of people who are might send you in a different direction than those who possibly hadn't. Yeah. So it's I think chief execs moan a lot about how trustees do or don't engage on the board, but I think a lot of it is our fault. We don't get the information right. Like we moan about too much. They're always diving into the detail, having sent them 100-page report with loads of detail in it, and then we get cross about that.
Yes,
we moan about into the detail of the accounts when we sent them the Excel spreadsheet with all the nominal codes. You know what I mean, written down, and then we wonder why are they diving into, it's like, I think we have so much power as chief executives over the information that's given, and if they're getting into detail, it's because we're giving them the wrong information. We need to be giving them high level strategic information. We need to give them trends and patterns, not here's last month's management accounts or the last quarter's management accounts, but here's the picture. This time last year it looked like this, and over the time it's done this, it's going up, it's going down, and here's what the forecast is saying. That's strategic level financial information, not, line 4, which is the coffee spend line. Anyway, that's just my feeling about it.
Something which used to make me roll my eyes in the meetings as the chief executive, so this was me at my worst, is when you have a trustee who makes the same point meeting after meeting after meeting, and as they make it for the third time, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, for goodness sake, I've answered this at the first meeting, I've sent you a supplementary paper at the second meeting, and you go, maybe this is human nature, and there's something about contextualizing the debate, and a bit like reminding them of where they are collectively in the kind of story of the issue, heading off some of those issues, whether it's having a conversation with that trustee before the meeting to remind them of this point, or having some reference in the paper so that you can just kind of bank it and move on. But that's the one that I find super frustrating.
Well, the one thing I always say, like the piece of paper that trustees never read are the minutes. If they do anything, it'll be the report, it'll be the proposal. Most trustees, if they're pushed for time, will absolutely not read the minutes. They'll just rely that they're okay. So if you rely on the minutes to remind trustees of what was agreed at the previous meeting, you're on hiding to nothing. So what we do at DSE, when we send out our board agendas, we have a separate section on the agenda. We have a bit that's called notes on the agenda. And so what we'll do is we'll take each agenda item. So we obviously put the purpose, and is this for alignment or is this for discussion? A point where we'll say something like, point 4, whatever the issue is. Trustees may remember we discussed this matter in some detail and it was agreed that ABC would happen. Because they don't remember. I mean, I only remember, Peter, the board meetings of the charity that I run, never mind the ones I've sat on, the ones I sit on as a trustee. So again, it can do as chief executives to help to remind our trustees of what was discussed before. It was agreed that we would move on. If you put it in the notes of the agenda, then they're more likely to have their memory jogged. But I say all this, I did exactly this. I was at a board meeting discussing a salary policy, not a DSC, a board that I sit on. And I'd been very, very passionate about how this policy needed to look and how we ought to be paying staff and all the rest of it. And so the thing came up and I said, well, I want to make sure. And they said, the chair very tactfully said, yes, Deborah, well, we implemented this because you made this argument at the meeting we had, 6 months ago. I was like, completely forgotten and just gone into, I'm passionate about this. And they'd basically done what I'd fought for the lines, they didn't point, although we did then joke at the main board meeting about, now this bit is to remind this discussion, you did make this point before, so we have to get some humour out of it. But yeah, so I'm not sitting here in a holy now, I failed as a trustee myself on more than one occasion, but I think chief executive would take the power. You have so much power, if you don't think your board are having the right sorts of discussions, give them the right information and they're more likely to have the right discussions.
Definitely.
So we are done now, I think, aren't we? It's like, yeah, our podcast producer is nodding and making like slicing neck moves to get us to shut up.
Very
good. So
good.
much fun talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Anything special planned for the weekend? Life beyond work?
No, not really. A couple of medical things, as we get older, stuff goes wrong. So a few sort of things like that to deal with, but not really.
Well,
Looking after my poor
so long
puppy
as
wasn't very well.
so long as nothing falls off. That's what Esther Ranson used to say to me whenever I say, "How are you?" Nothing's fallen off, and she's still going. So there we are. All right then,
Peter.
great.
Yeah, thank you, listeners, for listening. As always, please, email us if you think we've said something you disagree with. We're always up for a fight, if and an argument and a discussion about stuff, and let us know if this is working for you.
If there's a particular,
I enjoy talking to others so much, I'm not sure we might.
If there's a particular prime minister you need an anecdote about, I'm sure we can find something from somewhere. Brilliant.
We can.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks very much.